Well, it really is a pleasure to be with you all here today. I'm sorry to have interrupted your lunches, and I hope you had a good lunch and you had a chance to network and see some of our exhibitors as well. In the earlier slides given by Stephen, we saw that productivity and efficiency was one of the key themes, and that's what we're going to discuss today. I'm Wyn Ferrier, part of the Next Generation Professional and Financial Services team and a part of Innovate UK Business Connect. Our panel today is about introducing you to some new friends and some existing friends of the programme. And I'm delighted to be joined by a panel that is really representative of the geographies that Julian and Michael showed us in their report earlier, and some of the subsector areas that we support. But rather than let me introduce them to you, why don't I let them introduce themselves? That's David, Gemma, Shoaib, and Nick. Shoaib.
Afternoon, folks. I'm Shoaib, the founder and CEO of RD Vault. We help businesses claim compliant research and development tax credit claims. So HMRC distribute around £7 to £8 billion every year in the form of R&D tax credits and reliefs. And over the past few years, HMRC have announced that around 1.13 billion of that goes missing either because of non-compliant or fraudulent R&D claims. So what we've been doing over the past few years with the support of Innovate UK, having funded just under £1 million of project value, is develop IP to help businesses make compliant R&D claims and reduce the risk of error and reduce the probability of inquiries as much as possible. And that's something that we've been doing with a view of also expanding in the US soon as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Nick Jordan. I'm one of the founders of Broker Central, and we're an insurtech startup. And normally when startups have an idea, they normally focus on one particular issue. We spoke to a lot of brokers, and actually there's loads of issues that are in the industry. So we've set out to build a system that addresses pretty much all of them. And it's been a long journey. We've been going for about 3 years in stealth mode. We launched the product last year. And yeah, we're seeing great results. 56% of a broker's time is spent doing non-client related activities. And time is money, and that has to change. And that's why we've built Broker Central.
Hi everyone, I'm Gemma. I'm Operations Director at Collaborative Conveyancing. I'm not sure, probably lots of people in the room have bought and sold a house. It's a very painful and long-winded process. And part of our solution is to help with the middle part of that in process, which is all around inquiries. There's lots of these inquiries that go back and forth from residential property lawyer to another. It's very, very convoluted. It's stressful. It takes up a lot of their time. And we set out to develop a solution to try and resolve that. So we were funded also by Innovate. We're in collaboration with the Hartree Centre, probably three years ago now, and a bit like similar to the other people on the panel. We were in stealth mode for a while as well, and we just launched our product at the back end of last year. So yeah, we've been doing well. It's definitely a problem that needs solving in the industry, and we're still working towards kind of the best way to help lawyers deal with that.
Hey guys, I'm David Arder. I'm a business and product lead at Ork1. We are a generative AI company that sells this new agentic AI into financial services firms. So we work with the largest global banks, private equity, hedge funds, and private credit firms. We took 2 grants on from Innovate UK, one for developing a KYC solution and one for incorporating geospatial data to improve kind of nature positivity of investments. We've been growing very rapidly, so kind of 5x'd our customers last year, on track to do the same again this year. I think that's it.
Wonderful, some great businesses here. So If we've got enough time later, we'll take a couple of questions from the audience, except for perhaps Andrew, who might be a bit too edgy for us. But the sort of thing I wanted to sort of fire the panel up about is, how are professional financial institutions really improving their productivity with AI? What is the baseline? Where do you start? I heard that, in 2025, agentic AI is the sort of buzzword. So, I'll open it up to the panel. Maybe you could comment on that.
Well, I think it's probably what I can jump in on. A bit like the slides earlier, I mean, UK and EU companies in general, but also banks have lagged behind the US in productivity for a good few years. When we've kind of gone out and done research, a lot of these firms are spending the majority of their time, up to 80%, doing the sort of tasks that look like open, these 100 documents, look for this piece of information, add this piece of information into this report, into this PowerPoint deck, into this kind of new format. And the people that you're paying to do that also, are very, very skilled employees. They've come out the top business schools, finance firms, and they're being paid a fortune to effectively, go fetch. And so we work with our clients to get rid of that. We like to think of it as an army of interns. Generative AI is pretty good, but it's not all the way there. And so a bit like an intern, if you can give it a simple task and you're willing to check the first draft, it can do an awful lot of that grunt work for you. So instead of you going out and doing the base level insights, you're getting a first draft that you can review, and then you can spend your time working on the higher value stuff, which is more interesting and much more valuable.
We have something similar, actually. It seems like a really simple task, but property lawyers have lots of these inquiries that come in, often on email, either in attachments. And at the moment, in the main, they would copy and paste those into their own type of Word document table. Sometimes they still print them off, highlight them. So we initially started to develop a solution that said, could we just recognize what's an inquiry and what's not an inquiry? That was years ago now. We had to bring it on quite quickly, actually, and then start to work out, could we understand a little bit more about what was being asked? But we were never looking to make any recommendations on behalf of that lawyer. We were just looking to reduce that administrative burden that they were taking all of that time, just copying and pasting, and sometimes missing things. It was getting to the end of a transaction, and something would be missed somewhere along the way, and guess what? It falls through, and no one wants that. So could we reduce some of that? So really similar.
I think if anyone's in insurance here, I think one of the biggest time drains is the rekeying of data. Particularly in insurance broking, there's so many disparate systems where a broker will have to take data from one source, that they collect from a client, and then copy and paste it or manually rekey it into 5 different systems if they want to get quotes from different insurers. And that just isn't a great use of their time. And again, going back to my point originally about time is money. It is literally time is money for insurance brokers and for insurance professionals. And so one thing I forgot to mention actually at the start, and apologies, Win, we were actually funded by Innovate UK to build a tool that directly addresses that issue, and that is automatically rekeying data from disparate systems into web portals. Another piece of that puzzle was also extracting data in a kind of unstructured format from documents that are issued by insurance providers to the broker, taking that information, then structuring it into a document or into data points that the broker can then use to give to their client. So I think, it seems like there is a desperate need across the board in financial services for the streamlining of the rekeying of data, or elimination of rekeying of data.
It's amazing that in some ways we're sat here in 2025 and we're all solving the same problem, which is just getting data from one place to another.
And again, with the experiences from within RD Vault, if you look at the evolution of AI, and you look at for example, Excel spreadsheets. Some of you guys might have been sort of accustomed to using macros or finite state machines or rule-based algorithms, and that would be sort of robotic process automation almost to some extent, or certainly in its infancy. You're now seeing the adoption of the likes of large language models like Claude, for example, and that's being used, or sort of industry-specific models being used in accountancy and tax, and you're seeing more and more of those as well now being adopted. And what we're seeing at RD Vault is when you're trying to increase the level of compliance when it comes to sort of making sure you've accommodating the rules of HMRC, is that the more reliance upon AI, you do get a bit of sort of increasing productivity to get towards the finishing line, but the last 10% is always the hardest, because what you'll find is that the AI model makes assumptions or predictions based on or interpretations of different sorts of legislation, and that has a massive impact, and again, that needs human intervention. When you sort of mentioned agentic AI in your sort of opening comment, where you are automating the process without any human intervention. I think that's quite, it is a buzzword. I think that's quite far ahead in the future. There's a bit of time to travel and a bit more sort of technology to be evolved. But what we are seeing is, in our business at least, is yes, AI is helping with getting an R&D claim, but it's not the be-all and end-all, and there is a human intervention required, and that's something that we're seeing.
That's great. And I'm glad you mentioned Claude and not the other large language model as well. So, you're keeping it sort of mixed and balanced. I was going to ask you about use cases. I think because quite a few members of the audience, they're interested in these use cases. They see them in the news. But what is specifically the sort of thing that, excites you about your own company and what you're using? So I'm actually going to bounce down the line, if I may, Sherry.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of use cases, and again, experimenting with adoption of and development of AI and ML techniques, one thing that we started doing as part of our Innovate UK grant is saying, okay, great, we have a lot of financial data, we want to prepare an R&D claim, but how can we go about doing that? Did John Smith spend 10% of their time on R&D? And finding that information without an interview process is quite difficult. And then secondly, the interview itself, can that be automated? Is there a finite sort of list of questions that you can ask a customer or a sort of claimant company that can get you to a very conclusive answer? And the short answer is no, there isn't. So again, I'm coming back to the fact that yes, AI is helping and automating a lot of processes in perhaps other areas of financial services, but where you are sort of delving into legislation which isn't necessarily prescriptive, it's not a binary yes or no or one or two, we're finding that we're having to intervene a lot more and more. And something that we're now doing is trying to educate our customers by saying, okay, if you're going to put down that John Smith did spend 10% of their time on R&D, you need to justify that in the way of timesheets and et cetera. And again, we're seeing HMRC asking these sorts of questions day in, day out. And again, coming back to the number of inquiries that HMRC are now sort of issuing, there used to be a team of just 30 people. Now the ICAW have said that there are around 500 inspectors reviewing R&D claims. And there is sort of news, or certainly within amongst our peers, an understanding that perhaps HMRC are now starting to use generative AI to develop HMRC inquiries into R&D claims, where they're using natural language processing to read through the reports and ask some questions. And that's become quite obvious when the questions that it's asking, and again, this is an assumption, it's not confirmed by HMRC at least, it's asking questions beyond the scope of what's actually within the report.
In terms of how we use AI in our own processes, our own business, We use a tool called Intercom. I don't know if anybody runs a SaaS company. You use Intercom? Great.
We do.
And that's not an endorsement, but check it out. And basically what Intercom will do is it will scour your support articles, and if somebody sends a live chat, it will try and answer the question ahead of a human having to deal with it. And this is it's a bit of a debate in itself as to whether we should be replacing customer service people with AI. I don't think we should be. But what it is it's an early triaging system. So if it's a basic query, Fin AI, as it's known, will be able to intercept all of your support articles and make suggestions. But there's always an option there for the client to say, actually, I want to speak to a human, and then somebody takes over from that point. But it's saved us a heck of a lot of support time in having to kind of manually deal with every single interaction that comes into the business.
I won't echo those comments, but we do use it for a similar thing. But our actual product is around, I mentioned it earlier, around taking these inquiries, recognising, is it an inquiry, is it not an inquiry? There's lots of other text that goes around this. So we did that first of all. Once it's done that, already saving some time for lawyers, it can then work out what's being asked. There's infinite number of topics and tasks you can imagine around houses and houses being bought and sold. But if we could narrow that down and use AI to work out what we think the topic and task is, we can send that off to our knowledge graph, which is being curated by subject matter experts. So it's not looking at any generative AI. It's stuff that we have put in. We could return some information. All it does then is give the property lawyer, sort of narrows down, again, like we've been talking about, narrows down some of the responses or the actions that they may need to take. They still need to pick one. They still need to potentially edit it and send it or change it before it goes back to the other side or to the client. But could we start to just help them on their way, especially if they're new to the profession? We can help them with knowledge, with some case law, some links and things. And we found that has saved time and has also been able to upskill them or help maybe paralegals start the case and then be reviewed by someone else. So that's how we would use it in our business.
Yeah, so we found a similar thing to Sharab, that a lot of, if you just throw Gen AI at a problem, it's probably going to lie to you in a convincing way. And so we try to use it within our products for tasks where it's strong rather than where it's weak. So pulling data out, sourcing that data, reasoning when you've given it a framework where you want it to do a specific set of things, maybe identify any topics or people or stuff like this mentioned in an article in a very closed way, but building those systems up in kind of layers to create a more complicated workflow that allows you to fix something which is a much longer, more complicated end-to-end solution. But Nick, I like what you said as well about kind of how you use it internally, and it got me thinking that we're very much the opposite. So I think we're under a lot of pressure globally with the rise of kind of generative AI companies and what's expected of a kind of high growth startup. Companies like Klarna obviously are trying to use Gen AI for everything. Companies like Lovable in Europe are kind of redefining what it means to be successful around ARR, so annual recurring revenue per employee. And this kind of new wave of companies that have come through this year, setting the kind of bar at £1 million per person, which is terrifying, but is really kind of driving us internally to say, okay, where actually are these traditional inefficiencies that, we can basically give everyone an assistant or everyone 10 assistants to kind of scale what we can do.
I think sometimes there might be a danger of a bit of an AI arms race.
Yeah.
And I see this all the time in SaaS, is that the way to try and grab more market attention is to say we're AI enabled. Okay, what does that mean? What problem are you actually addressing? And that's what we're being really deliberate in our product. We don't want to just scatter AI across the whole system. We want to actually focus on real problems and real solutions that solve those problems. And all too often I see kind of tech firms just throwing AI at any solution. It's not always the right solution.
We've had comments where people have said, can we have more AI? More, and I was like, no, this is enough AI in the product. Does it do what you need it? Does it do what you need it to do? Oh, it does. Well, we don't need more AI at the moment, but it's forever developing, but just for the moment, we're fairly considered with that.
So the panel seemed to have talked about technology, but I was listening earlier to Martin One's panel, and that was around upskilling. And Rachel made a comment about people and culture. So my sort of thoughts turn to the operational side of things, specifically around how do you harness AI to improve your internal efficiencies, your processes, how does the culture change? What are the sort of things that you need to think about, especially when you start to scale up? So I thought I might come to you, Gemma, for that.
I knew you would, Will. That's okay. So I had to think about this, actually, because I first thought, okay, you should always think about what the problem is, or if there is a problem that you're trying to solve, and then potentially try and find a solution to do that, to maybe create these efficiencies. But I think there's maybe another approach here where it is good to be aware of things or solutions or new topics and things that are out there that could help you, to potentially give you some ideas. But I think you should always go back to, I'm looking at my operation, where could I become more efficient? And the reasoning for that is not to get rid of people, it's not to cut your operation down. Maybe these people could be repurposed somewhere else, they could learn different skills, they could upskill, but we could really just take away some of that administration they're having to do. And I think in most roles now, there's quite a lot of pressure and burden that comes with that. We're just receiving emails all the time, and we're always able to communicate with each other. And that sometimes stops you getting on with the role and the task that you need to do. So I think from my side, it was all around that, finding out if there's anywhere in the operation that you think could be improved efficiently, and then seeing if there is a solution out there that could help you, and exploring that with people in your workforce as well, rather than a top-down approach. What could you do? What could make your lives easier? And is there anything we could do to explore to help you with that?
I very much concur with what you've said there, Gemma. And again, just to add to what's been said just there, there was an interesting article by the Institute of Chartered Accountants in May 2024, which said that 71% of mid-tier businesses or accountancy firms are going to be adopting AI over the next 3 years. And what was interesting to me was that they have intentions of adopting AI within the realms of accountancy and tax, but not necessarily actually establishing what they want to use AI for. And again, it's going back to, do I have a problem? Can that problem be fixed using AI? Should it be fixed using AI? And if it can, what is the delta? What are the efficiencies? What are the sort of deltas when it comes to providing good advice and providing good tax advice? And again, going back to our experience of delving into AI, there were a couple of elements, or number of elements, I should say, of processing an R&D claim that we thought would use AI and would help us in achieving a good R&D report. And then we've actually retracted or removed that feature from the experimentation. So, and again, that may be because the technology isn't there, it may be because of a lack of data, or perhaps a lack of trust in the LLMs. But again, it was something that was quite interesting to me, at least.
I think also we mustn't be blinded by the fact that it's an AI solution, so it must solve my problem. Think back to when there was no AI. We were looking to solve a problem and we want some measurable results from it. So anything that you put in place or you ask your employees to possibly engage with, it needs to be measurable. An example might be a company may put in Copilot. It can be very, very useful. But unless you know what you're measuring, what the outputs might be, how is this useful to you, unless, apart from anecdotal kind of evidence, I'm not really sure there's a strong enough business case for you to report back and say, I spent this much money and it improved operational efficiency by this much, so therefore I saved. And I think that's the conversation that firms and companies need to start having before they even think about changing ways of working. And then there could be some fantastic results from that.
I think there's probably, for the employee side as well, there's a positive anecdote. I don't know if anyone here is a chess fan or old enough to remember Kasparov Deep Blue in the late 90s. but this was the first time a computer beat the best player in the world at chess. And that's kind of seen as the defining moment. But for the next 10, 15 years, till the early 2010s, the strongest way to play chess was a human and AI. So a human and AI would be an AI alone and would obviously be a human alone. And the story is probably very similar for generative AI in that people who can use generative AI effectively, who can reskill and kind of leverage themselves, are probably going to do really, really well. And the more we can train and upskill people to be in that group of people, then I think that's where you'll see outside returns for a long, long time, and before people start getting, you know, seeing their jobs disappear. They're just going to be able to do more and better work.
Agreed.
There's the old classic phrase, work smarter, not harder. And in software development, developers will do anything they possibly can. Right? Rather than doing something manually, they'll spend 6 weeks writing a script to do it. But I think, yeah, to echo those kind of thoughts, you're empowering your employees, you're empowering your team to actually feel good about what they're doing, and they're actually, you know, their life is richer, and they can do more in less time, and they get more done in this, you know, better quality. So, yeah, and that's what we found as well. So using Copilot as the example, we actually did implement Copilot. I don't have any specific stats.
There you go.
Apart from there's not as many miserable faces. So
There was one, so in the latest Y Combinator accelerator, 95% of the code written by all the tech companies was Copilot, was like
Good.
generative. So they were just thinking about the problems, and then the AI was doing the actual writing.
But the danger of that, though, is then there's no kind of oversight over the code that's actually written. Bug fixing becomes a bit more complicated because the developer hasn't written the code. But that's a different story.
Well, I've always found the developer community to be, you know, open and, you know, willing to share their information. So just to balance things there. The use of AI and is great, especially when you're sort of using this for customer-facing activities. It speeds things up, and, you know, potentially it can be misused. You know, but AI is fighting back. I don't know if you've seen Daisy. She's a sort of a chatbot that talks back to scammers, and she says, I think there are a few nods around the room. And she's great. You know, you should go online and see her saying, "Did you say pastry, dear?" It's really very funny. But back to reputation and reputational risk of customer-facing AI. I just wondered, Nick, I'm going to pick on you. You know, what are the risks of using, you know, AI to sort of deal with customer complaints and information?
Well, as has been discussed today, AI can get it wrong. You know, using the example with the intercom system that we have, sometimes it might say things that aren't true, or maybe not quite true, and then you get frustration from the client, and they feel like they're just a number. It's the kind of the equivalent of, your call is important to us, please hold. And that's, I think, from a reputational point of view, that's the kind of the risk, is if we go too far down the AI route, that people just feel not valued, and there's issues around that. We have obviously our own set of AI tools that we allow our clients to deal with their customers with, and that's usually around kind of extracting contractual terms from insurance agreements and then summarising them and passing them along. The risk there is obviously a compliance risk. If somebody is seen to be providing inaccurate information to their client, the industry is regulated by the FCA, there could be a breach there. So it's a much bigger risk. So there's kind of the reputational side, but also the more serious, you know, you could be providing the wrong advice. And to kind of get around that, we always say to our clients, this is a tool, and we've made it quite clear. It might not always get it right. Make sure you check it. This is designed to work alongside you, not to replace you. And also, if you have a look at our terms and conditions, there are a few clauses in there which mention words to that effect. But yes.
I think one thing accountancy and tax professionals would need to do is be super transparent. When we're dispensing any accountancy or tax advice or preparing financial statements, is either to make the client aware that AI was used in the process, but then going back to first principles again, going back to the pain point that we're trying to solve, you know, you have a letter of engagement, you have a duty of care, you have a professional body, you have professional indemnity insurance, and these are all sort of cogs within the big machine that need to be oiled, looked after, and considered to make sure that the advice that you're dispensing, A, is truly factual to the best of the ability within the scope of the engagement. What's interesting, again, coming back to something I read fairly recently, actually, in the Accountancy Age, is that the adoption of AI in accountancy is meant to add another £2 billion to GDP and create an additional 20,000 jobs. Okay, and this is from the Accountancy Age. So what's interesting is, okay, so if we're going to be using AI to automate the dispensing of tax advice, then what is creating those extra 20,000 jobs? Is it validation, verification, and checking of the AI, or is it the fact that accountants are now able to dispense more advice because a lot of the mundane tasks are being automated? And I think we're seeing that already with the likes of Receipt Bank, Zero, gamification within the realms of all these different products. So again, going back to the reputational risk, if you are regulated, I would suggest you go back to your board and sort of try and understand what their rules and requirements are. But again, I truly believe this is still an experimental area.
Great. Now, true story. I had an interaction with a chatbot for a large broadsheet. It was the FT, actually. And I thought I was talking to a chatbot, and actually I was talking to a human operator on the other side. And I couldn't tell the difference, So, one of the things is that, that people think that AI is becoming empathetic, it's been sentient, i.e. developing feelings potentially. So, my question is to all of you, because you're sort of dealing with customers all the time, how do you marry AI with human advice? I mean, what's the magic formula?
I think the first use case I'd already mentioned, which is around we can provide some recommendations, but the human has to interact with that as well. So we've already covered that. But we have started developing some voice AI now, which is there to provide, in our case, a conveyancing quote. So it's called Sarah. We developed it ourselves, and it's more interactive than I thought it would be. And it's really there to cut down just this initial stage of quoting that a human might be doing in the first place. It's probably going to have to be passed on after then. But if it cuts down that initial stage, that would be brilliant. The client or the consumer has to fill in a form to start with, so she has some information to go on, and actually she takes that information, which is really good. I said I was buying a house, it was my first house, she said it was very exciting. So she does take that, and it's a chatbot, but it's still better. We were talking at lunchtime, it's still better than the say one yes, say no, say this. It's still better than that, and it does feel conversational. It's very pacey, actually. You could get through it very quickly if that was the tone and the kind of pace that you were using. She matches that as well. So that felt quite natural to me, even though it's obvious, yes, it is a chatbot. So I think we are getting there, and there's low risk. We're providing a quote. It's of fixed figures, so it's not too bad, and it's going to go through to a human in the end anyway. But it did cut down on that initial stage, which would be dealt with a human and a consumer. And as Wynne said, that the AI is almost becoming better in some circumstances on that initial stage.
I think the use case from us is completely different in some ways, that our end clients are generally internal users who are looking to get something done. So I'll take it in a slightly different direction, which is one of the things we think sets us apart from kind of general AI solutions is what we'd call theory of mind, or understanding how the employees in these businesses think about a problem. If you go on to ChatGPT and ask it to do, research a company for you, it's going to come up with a generic approach to doing that. But when you're dealing with specialized use cases where people have been trained to do something in a specific way, even if you jump between firms who are effectively doing the same thing, they're going to have different ways of doing it. And I think for a lot of vertical use cases like this, you'll see AI and AI solutions that really narrow in to allow the system to focus on exactly how those users would complete and work on a task. So a bit impersonal, but I think going to be really important over the next couple of years as kind of B2B generative AI comes through.
So in Martin Tu's panel, he talked about ESG, and I believe ESG is the model, sustainability is the theme. Where's Andrew when you need him? So I would rather, can I risk asking the question, what panel, your thoughts, if you've got some thoughts on ESG, I'll throw it out there. It's a bit edgy, but
so
we
were actually chatting over lunch, and I pre-warned that I had a slightly different opinion. So I've just come back from an ESG conference in New York, and the part of the business that I look after is almost entirely focused on this kind of ESG risk compliance type use cases, and have been very worried since obviously the political changes, but have come back far more positive. I think professionals over there still care. There's going to be a little bit of a rebranding, a little bit of a makeup change, costume change, but underneath that, a lot of these requirements are still there, partly driven by Europe. So omnibus notwithstanding, there's still regulatory requirements in Europe to do this kind of stuff. And all the pension funds who are giving money to these big American financial firms, a lot of them are based in Europe, and they still care. People with a long-term interest in their money still want to make sure that, the factories aren't going to be flooded in 30 years, or that these returns are sustainable. So I think on that kind of side, much more positive. I think something that's perhaps not thought about as much is kind of the ESG concerns of using AI. So we've touched a bit on maybe some of like the bias or the reliability stuff. There's also, I think, questions around energy use. So I know Azure, not a plug for Microsoft, but they have a commitment to moving all their generative AI to renewables, which is great. But you can't build renewables that quickly. You can't build these alternative power sources this quickly. So if there is a massive new demand for generative AI compute, that requires a hell of a lot of energy. That energy has to come from somewhere. And if we can't, the energy that would have gone to decarbonizing homes is instead going to go to Sarah the chatbot.
She's not taking up that much energy, I can assure you. She hung up on me yesterday, so little energy.
An interesting thing I read about actually was there's a few firms actually utilising the excess heat from these data centres to warm people's homes. So actually, in a way, it kind of is an answer to its own problem, potentially.
Instead of Argos, we'll all have data centres in the kitchen.
Rent a server.
Yeah.
Now, David, you mentioned Europe, and so did Martin, actually, in the EU AI Act. But I wanted to throw it out there. What are the bumps in the AI road? What are the things that you think are going to sort of catch us out? And what do you think the audience should be thinking about as they go about their projects?
It's an interesting question. One of the things I would, and again, in the context of HMRC regulation, tax legislation, is the regulatory sort of changes and uncertainty. Sometimes laws are introduced which take into effect in the future. Other times laws are introduced which could impact something that's already been has already happened in the past, whether it's a tax relief of some sort or some sort of a complex transaction. And the question is, when you adopt AI in the land of accountancy and tax, how much reliance do you give on the solution that you're using when it comes to regulatory changes? Yes, naturally, you have a Finance Act which comes into sort of force every April or every July, whenever it may be. But then you've also got cases that set precedents in tax and legislation. And if that sort of information isn't in the AI model that you're using, then you have a massive risk of potentially dispensing inaccurate advice. And again, the interpretation of legislation which is potentially why we have a lot of the case law in existence, really. How do you interpret? Do you provide some sort of bias to the model to say, hey, with this particular transaction, if this happens, I know the legislation says X, but we also know that they mean Y. And again, that's just a sentiment analysis. So that is a definite big issue when it comes to sort of AI and its adoption, certainly within tax and accounting that I foresee.
I think for me, this is a current bump actually, and it seems a lot simpler. There's just an overwhelm of solutions, and for people who are building them, but also people who are looking to consume them. I think that makes it very, very difficult. Just this amount of solutions available to us and to people who are looking to buy products from us as well. It makes it difficult to interpret what could really help me now that will also be fit for future. I think that is probably the trickiest thing at the moment. So maybe not a future, I mean, it's going to go into the future, but the real tricky part at the moment for me.
Yeah, I think I can offer two thoughts building on both of those. I think if anyone here is looking to buy kind of generative AI or sophisticated solutions there, I think one of the short-term bumps, as well as having far too many people to have to review, is that a lot of the technology is at the stage where you can make a very convincing demo, and there are very few firms out there who can turn that into a scaled kind of production rollout. A lot of the revenues, of the consulting firms is just from doing POC projects and with very little carry on. So that's probably something to be wary of. And on the regulation piece, apart from the geopolitical uncertainty, I think even within AI, nobody knows what's going to happen next year. A lot of the US restrictions on AI chips for China were designed to stopping them getting cutting-edge generative AI. And then you had DeepSeek come out, because actually the next advance wasn't where the last one was. It was at inference, and the restrictions don't actually affect that. So I think there'll be a lot of twists and turns as things kind of develop.
I just wonder if we're potentially making ourselves vulnerable to, if it's all about the over-reliance on any tool, isn't it? Not just AI, but if we're building processes in our businesses that are solely relying on AI, and AI disappears, or if they increase the cost, this is another thing that might happen with OpenAI. They're losing money left, right, and centre. So they might go from being a few quid to being tens of thousands, potentially. This is one of the things to consider. How reliant are we on these tools, and do we have a backup plan?
So as we're sort of drawing to the end of this really exciting and interesting conversation, I thought if we could have two questions from the audience, if we still got time, one from this side and maybe one from that side. Do we still have time for two questions? No, I think everyone's questioned out. I'll just leave you this philosophical thought that the EU AI Act has been designed by people, okay? And it's designed to regulate something that could potentially have artificial general intelligence that's much smarter than us. Okay, so when might that point occur? So, maybe have a think about that. It just remains for me to thank this wonderful panel and all of you for listening, and really appreciate your time and trouble and you getting here as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks.